the other thing about that clip for me is it definitely represents a little bit of what I see in Dave's journey as a professional, which is that, 2003 Dave for me actually, well, it's 20 years now since Killing Him Softly, right? It's 20 years since his big breakout stand up in 2000. So that was a guy who I really believe like cared, and now I see, so it's kind of like the analogy for me is like the movie Moonlight, when you have this vulnerable, sensitive teenager who's really skinny. And then when they fast forward to him in the last act of the film and he's jacked and he doesn't give a shit and he's tough. And that is that is the difference between 2003 Dave and 2020 Dave for me. Is like 2020 Dave is like explicitly like, you know what? I used to give a shit and I ended up having to leave the game for 10 years and run away and like do all this stuff. It weighed on me too much to care that much. And now I'm almost going to celebrate yeah.
He still cares, right? Do you not think, or no?
I think this is the big question. And I think this is one of the big questions. And it's almost like not the most important question because, one of the things he does, and maybe I can show this later, that I think is the function that George Carlin did before him in the comedian game, was like represent the worst sides of ourselves on stage. And so but Dave and George, like they both would go back and forth between making kind of like moral comments that were more explicitly or straight up, like you should never like judge anybody for their identity, or, he'll say stuff like this, but he's also doing it as a setup to then go, but, or like, however, I'm about to do it. And like, and just, so he also using it as setup to this, but it creates a little bit of a confusion in the sense of, which is part of the humor, in the sense of like, okay, which one's the real Dave? Is the real Dave the one who's saying, everybody deserves respect, or is the real Dave the one who's kind of saying like, okay, you guys are weird and, yuck, and all this stuff.
How about both though? I think the power in both Carlin and Dave and others in that cloth is that they are saying it's complex. It's weird. We're weird. Even in his most recent stuff, the controversial like Sticks and Stones, he's like posing questions, which is a way to kind of give himself cover, I think, in some ways. Like if he has a controversial view, it's like, well, just a thought,
Yeah.
But the absolutes, the moral absolutes, I think are something we need to be mindful of and careful with. And the idea that any of us has the answer to it, and that we're perfect, and that we're, righteous all of the time, that we don't have thoughts, that we don't have biases. He's saying, yo, I have biases. You have biases. Come on, admit it, And let's talk about it and let's laugh at it. And through that, we can heal and whittle back to you and whittle those biases down. That's how I see it. And
that's the big question, I guess, in the sense of by laying those biases out there. So this is the reason why he left the Chappelle show, right? So like the big tension that was going on inside him at the time, when this famous episode 2006 where he walks away from $50 million and leaves the show, and everybody else involved with it kind of left hanging. And there's this whole question, everybody, says he's crazy and all this stuff. And I really suggest people watch his interview on Inside the Actors Studio when he comes back after that. And he talks about, calling people crazy is like the worst thing you can call somebody, because it really diminishes them. And it's like the laziest thing you can do, because it's saying, I don't understand them, so I'm just going to label them this thing called crazy, and I'm not even going to make any attempt to understand where they're coming from. And then, he gets into it, and he actually says it really well in an interview with Oprah too. He explains how he was doing a skit about race on the show, and one of his jokes, he heard a white, it's not clear whether it's like an audience member or camera guy or something like this, laughed in a way, and he says, I know the difference between somebody laughing with me and somebody laughing at me, and that was laughing at me. Right. And so he showed this real caring of realizing like, okay, when I do sketches about crack users, when I do sketches about, you know, portraying some of these biases that we have around race in our heads, or some of these stereotypes we have around race in our heads, I can also be reinforcing them.
Yeah.
And giving them like a beloved spokesperson.
I think his show straddled that line really dangerously. And that was part of what made it so funny and iconic. He was saying things that people were awkward about. I think I saw an article from Ta-Nehisi Coates from years back where he critiqued Chappelle's skit on reparations.
If you're just joining us, black people got their reparations checks today, and in short, all hell is broken loose.
All the liquor stores and the chicken places were sold out.
Gold is way up. Diamonds are at their most expensive level ever. Catchphrase around here is certainly bling bling. Oil has dropped to $1.50 a barrel, while chicken shot to $600 a bucket. Amazing news there.
I don't think that skit was one of his best skits, but it was definitely one of those skits that made people, I mean, it just played deeply into all the stereotypes. I mean, that's just all it did. It was a big like, oh, you know, and it cheapened the campaign for reparations, according to Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I think there's perhaps some truth to that. I mean, this is complex. And I think maybe that skit was one of the skits that weighed on him more heavily than so many of the others, because it was so, I think, the humor was there, but it wasn't, to me, I remember at the time I laughed, but I you know, he has so much other material that I thought was great. And that might have been one of his misses, if you ask me. But when you're straddling that line so closely all the time, that potential is always there, I think.
It's like when you're that big and you're reaching that diverse of an audience, it's like unavoidable that every skit is like going to do good and do harm, you know, at some level. You know, I can talk about like from my own experience, you know, I when I went to university, I went, you know, I grew up in a neighborhood that had a large ethnic diversity, and I grew up around a lot of black people, and then went to a university which had like very few, and Chappelle's show kind of came out around that transition. So I actually was able to see Chappelle's show in where I went to high school, and then Chappelle's show at university. And I can say that, for example, like the Tyrone skit was way more popular at my like almost all white university, around kids that hadn't
the crackhead.
Is this a 5 o'clock free crack giveaway?
The crackhead skit, which, you know, that is very similar to the Anton character that Damon Wayans would play on In Living Color. These sketches, like, for me, are some of the only ones in the Chappelle Show that are lacking layers. Exactly. You know, like it's very one layered. It's very just like, you know, an exaggerated version of what some people who use crack, you know, look like or act like, and things like this. And it was just, when I think back on it, it was kind of shocking to realize like how those were the sketches that resonated above the other sketches, above Black Bush, above even like the Charlie Murphy Real Hollywood Stories, which play with questions of like ego, and so, along with all the humor, like some of these the more layered and what I think like much more artistic and beautiful and hilarious bits that Chappelle Show did, like these were the top ones. Like this Tyrone, I remember people like dressing up as Tyrone for Halloween, and it was a big thing. And the whole like you know, you're talking about the chicken joints, you know, people when they get their reparations, wherever going. I remember like growing up like not really associating that whole like chicken and watermelon thing, which he talks about in his stand-up. And then I remember at university there was this scandal because some guys dressed up as the Jamaican bobsled team, and some white guys, and they painted their faces and they went in blackface, and then one of them had like a KFC bucket on his head, and it's like, I feel like these in some ways are kind of like post Chappelle Show things. Like I feel like, you know, like these stereotypes or these biases kind of like came into that world through Chappelle in many ways.
Sure.
Like I don't think I would have understood what the hell the chicken bucket was doing there, like, you know,
Gotcha,
until then. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What I think is important to notice about Dave, I think, I don't know him personally, I get the sense that this is a guy who does think deeply about what he's saying and his impact. I want to say that more times than not, Dave Chappelle offers us a layered, creative approach to the things he's noticing. But he also does have stuff that I don't know. I don't know if he's ever like publicly denounced a particular sketch or a particular set of jokes, but I'm sure there are things that he'll look back and go, and he's currently looking back and go, I don't know if that was so great, and I use my platform in that way. And I think that's something he would do, and that's something he should do. And I think he's capable of that reflection, in my view, more than some other people.
Yeah, and that's why, like, sometimes there's, you know, when he makes this joke in one of his new stand-ups, I can't remember which one, one of the Netflix ones, you know, where he's talking about how there was a trans person who was devastated by one of his previous jokes, and then which gets a chuckle out of the audience, like just him saying that. Like, this is where the whole laughing at them and versus laughing with them thing that he was so sensitive to in the early years when he was doing race jokes, to the degree to which he dropped $50 million, left it on the table, abandoned his show and quit, like an unprecedented move, hinged around that concept, right? And now, you know, he just has to say, so I had this trans fan was devastated when they heard my joke, and he's already getting laughs from the room. And I feel like that's a sign, you know, the tone that he speaks in, and then the response he gets just from saying like those words is a sign that there's some laughing at going on. You know what I mean? And then he says, but I have a policy, like I never feel bad about anything I say on stage. You know, like and he gets a huge applause for that. And so this is what I mean, is like the new Dave, the post social media Dave, is kind of like developed this, a bit of more of like the shock comedian thing, is like, I'm just here to make you laugh, and I don't care, you know, what you think my humor does or says, or who it stigmatizes or whatever. Like, I'm not even listening.